In this lecture, now let's first discuss Amazon Personalize, a little bit what this is about, and of course afterwards we will then again implement this again in a practical way in AWS. So first of all, what is Amazon Personalize? Personalize is again a fully managed service, and this is a machine learning service that uses your data to generate item recommendations for your users. So for most use cases, Amazon Personalize is generating those recommendations primarily based on so-called item interaction data. Item interaction data is always generated when a user is interacting with an item. For example, this can happen when a user is clicking on a different item on a website, for example. This would generate some interaction or some data that we call item interaction. So this can be then used to generate recommendations for those items based on how the user has interacted with those items. So this can also, of course, come from historical data, so some bulk interactions, and also from some real-time events. So this can come directly as the user is interacting with our application, because sometimes we, or especially actually in those recommendations, we usually want to have them quite quickly so that we can get those recommendations in real time in our application. Common use cases include, of course, something that wants to personalize, for example, some personalized recommendations for example, video streaming platforms, or maybe some kind of product recommendations in an e-commerce app, or maybe adding some best action recommendations to your app in real time as well, or maybe even generating some recommendations. Or in regards to marketing, this can also create personalized emails or some more targeted marketing campaigns based on those user interactions, and of course always also some kind of personalized search results. So here these are essentially also some kind of a recommendation which result in a personalized way based on the user interactions will be first in our search result or in the user's search result. So these are all of the common use cases for Amazon Personalize, and now in the next lecture let's have a look at how this works in practice. In this lecture, we now want to have a closer look at Personalize, which is very interesting because with this we can build our own recommendation systems in a very managed and in a very easy way. So this is actually really nice because it's quite powerful and still it is not very complicated to set up. So let's see how we can do this. In our case, we will now therefore search for Personalize, and here we can already see again, this helps to easily create some recommendations and add this to our applications. So therefore we will select it, and in our case we will set up, you can see I have already done a little bit of work in here, and this is something that we will now also build. So we want to build a recommendation system for books. So we have some data, maybe some list of users. Those users have maybe rated some books and read some books, so we can see how they have interacted with our books. So our books are essentially our items, and of course this can be also movies or videos or items in an online store. This can be all kinds of items. In our case, the items are just the books. And then of course we have some kind of an interaction. In our case, the interaction is just the ratings. So how they have rated a given book, what kind of books they have already read. And then of course we want to, from this, create a recommendation system for all of the users. So we can input a user, and then for a specific user we want to recommend maybe another book that they haven't read yet. So this is the data that we are going to use. In here we can actually also quickly open this. So let me open this in Notepad. We can see that this is our data set with the interaction. This is what we use for training our model. So you can see we have here the user ID, we have all kinds of users available, and then we have the item ID. These are essentially our books. And then we have also the rating. So you can see we have different ratings This is probably ranging from 1 to 5. So this is like stars, 1 to 5 stars. And then also we have this timestamp. So in this case, this is just an integer that is representing our timestamp. So of course, integers, this can be, or a timestamp can be represented as an integer as well. So this can be converted into a timestamp. And then additionally, we have, as we have said, of course, also the list of user data. So we can also quickly open this. So we can see this is the user with some user ID, the name, and maybe some age or some additional attributes. And then additionally, we have also the items. So in this case, it is the movies. So we have item ID, the name of the movie, and then the year when this has been published. So you see in this case, it is not about books, but in this case, it is about movies. So we can also set this up, and to do this, we will click here on create a dataset group. So a dataset group is just the container for our resource. Even though this is called dataset group, this will also contain then our model and our entire recommendation system. But we call this dataset group because, of course, the datasets that we are going to upload, everything is based on them, and this is therefore in some way the core of what we are going to build. And here, therefore, we call this dataset group. We will upload here our datasets and also train our model. So let's go ahead and call this, in this case, movie recommendation. And in here, we have also a domain. So this can be just chosen. In our case, this is nor e-commerce nor video on demand, but we will just create our custom resource for our custom use case. So let's go ahead and create this group. And now we have this overview and those steps. So we will go through those steps. First of all, we have to create the data sets and import them. So you will see that we need this item interactions data set. This is the items. We remember this is the movies, all of those items. This is what we want to recommend. And then the interactions is the interaction from the items with the users. So this is the users. Then here we just upload the data set of our users. This is what we have seen before here as well. We have here the users, and then of course also we have the items itself. So the items are in our case again just the movies. So this can all be uploaded. We have some additional things that we can upload optionally, like some action data sets. Here we can have a little bit more metadata, but in our case, we want to not make it too complicated. So this is absolutely enough in our case to train the model. And this is what we will be starting to upload now. After that, we can run some analysis to see what can be maybe improved in our data, but we also don't need this. This is just optional. And then we will set up our training and our recommendation system. So we will call this a solution. This is essentially our model that we are going to create. And after that, using this so-called solution, this is just our trained model, we can get the recommendations. So we will go through this now step by step to see how this actually works. So step number one, we will now upload this first item interaction. So here we will now select item interactions dataset. We can now import the data directly. This is what we will be doing. So we call this dataset. This is our item interaction dataset. I would just call it like this. We can create a new schema. So in here, what we need to do, we need to give it a name. So I can also call this actually just item interaction. And now let's have a look at the schema definition. So this is the structure that the data that we are going to upload needs to match. So here we can see the name of the field and then also the type. In this case, let me have a look again at the file structure. So here we have the interactions. So therefore, this should look something like this. We have here the user ID. This is what we have. Then we have the item ID. This is also okay. And then afterwards, we also want to add some rating. So therefore, we will add an additional block here. I will just copy this one, and then afterwards, I will paste it. So here, this is our rating. We can also just call this rating. this is okay to be a string. We can also actually make it an integer. So this is a bit easier to understand. This is fine. So this is our schema that we will set up. Afterwards, we click on next. And now, of course, we have to choose a location for this data. So here we will create essentially an import job that will then go to this bucket. And then from this bucket, it will actually get the data using this job. And therefore we need to specify the name of the job. So I can say, for example, this is the interaction import job. And then also the location, we will upload this to a bucket. We will upload this to an S3 bucket. So therefore, let's go ahead, open this, and then we will create again a new bucket. So we can call this movie recommendation, and then maybe again a combination of numbers, and then we can create this bucket. And of course here we want to upload now our files. So let me open this movie recommendations bucket, and in here we will now add our files. So I have the data set, the movie ID titles with the year, this is the one I will be using, and then the user data. So let me drag and drop this in here, and then we can upload all of those 3 files together. Additionally, we now also need to grant permissions in this bucket so that Amazon Personalize can actually work with this bucket and get this data so that this can be correctly imported. And for this, what we need to do in this case is to set up a policy. And this will be a bucket policy, which means that in the bucket we define that this bucket can be accessed from Personalize. So therefore, we will navigate in our bucket to permissions, and here we have the bucket policy. So again, this is just a JSON document where we can define permissions from our bucket. So we can say from the side of the bucket, let's allow, for example, here Amazon Personalize to access this bucket. And here we will use the permission that I have already written. So we will just copy this. So in here we will actually say, as I've said, we will allow Personalize to access this bucket. And here we have to specify, of course, also then our bucket name. And also we will go ahead and now copy this. And here we need to now edit this policy. And then we can just paste it actually in here. And then afterwards we still have to modify the bucket name here. So we can find the bucket name up here. We need to insert this in here under bucket name. And also in here, let's make sure that we are not formatting this in any kind of a strange way. So this is how it's supposed to look. And then if we don't have any issues, we can save the changes. And now we have updated our bucket, and we can now specify the path. So essentially, this is something that we find under objects. So essentially, this is something that we find under objects. Here we want to use, in this case, the interaction data set. So we have just called this data set. And in here, we can copy this S3 URI to identify our resource. This is essentially exactly our data set. Okay, so this is the location. And in here, we can also create a new role. This is absolutely fine. And in here, we can also grant access to the buckets. So this role needs to have access. So here I just select, for simplicity reason, this S3 bucket or any S3 bucket. This is of course absolutely fine. Or we could also just enter the bucket name in here, but let's just leave it for simplicity to any S3 bucket and go ahead and create this role. We see the role has been created, and we can now go ahead and start the import. Here we can see failed to create a data import job for the item interactions dataset, insufficient privileges for accessing the data in S3. Let's check if we have our policy actually set up still correctly. So I will go back to our bucket, permissions, and in here we can see that this should be there. So there seems to be still some issue. Let's try this again, because I think we should have everything. Let's go to next. Here we have the data set itself. We have this execution role, which should be sufficient. So let me try this again. Otherwise, let's maybe just open IAM. So we can actually just open this. This will bring us to IAM. And in here we should be able to see now the roles. Let's navigate there. And in here we have the role, the one that we have created the most recently. So this is the Kendra data source. And in here, we just want to add an S3 policy so that we are sure that we have all of the access. So let me just add it like this as an additional policy. So we can find it and add this as a permission. And now it should work. So now let's try it again. So again, I will now start the import. And now we can see actually it's working. So this can be now done also for the other data sets. So step number 1 has been already done. This was the most important one. And now in the next lecture, we will finish this and also upload data set number 2 and data set number 3, upon which we are then able to set up the training for our recommendation system. So let's continue this in the next lecture. In the last lecture, we have uploaded the item interactions, and now we want to also upload the users data set. We have done this now in the same, we will do this now in the same way like we have done this also with the interactions. So let's just use again the same import method. Here we can now call this, in this case, user. So we call it just user data set. And then also we can create a new schema. We will call this maybe user schema. And then we again have to provide here those fields. Let's check in our file. So in here we can see with the user data how this looks like. We have the user ID. Then we also have the name and the age. So let's just go ahead, copy this. So we add a comma afterwards, jump into the next line and add it. And then we can just change it to the name. This is the name. And then we also have one more. I will also include this comma. Actually, I would just do it like this so I can remove it from here. And then we have here also the age, and the age is an integer. So we can just use here int. And then we have the schema definition so that the model understands how the data looks like. So we can again click on next. And now again, we just specify the import job name. So I say this is the user data import. Here again, we have the location. So let's go to our bucket here. So let's go to our objects. In here, we have the user data. We can again copy the URI from here, paste it as our location. We can now use the same service role that we have used before, start this import. And now let's also continue with the last one, the items data set. Here again, we call it items data set. Then we use a new schema. I call it maybe items schema. And then afterwards, we again check the schema, how it looks like. So we have here the movie titles. Here we will use the movies data with year. I will have a look at the schema. So we can see we have the item ID, then we have the title, and then also the year. So let me modify this as well. I add a comma, paste the same structure, and again, so that I have now those 3 fields. And in this case, we want to, of course, name them correctly. So here we have the title. Title is a string. And then we also have the year. The year will be then an integer. So let's have it defined like this. So it matches our structure. And again, we give this also an import job name. So I say this is the, let's say, item import. And then we have again the location. So we can copy this from here. Let's go back. Now it is the movie data with the years. And we also paste it as a location in here. We can use the same role now again. This is again fine. We start the import. And now this is also being imported. So this will just take a little while until this is all imported. And therefore, in the next lecture, we will then wait until this is done. And now, once this is done, we will go ahead and train our model. This means we will create the solution. So that's what we will be doing in the next lecture. Now that we have uploaded the data sets, and don't worry if it still shows here 1 out of 5, this just takes a little while until this is being uploaded. So here we can also see under our existing data sets that in this case I have those 3 available. So we can see they are actually all active. So this is already reflected, and this should also update here pretty quickly. Afterwards, we can now go ahead and create our solution. So this is actually training the models so that they can be used in later on so-called campaigns. So therefore, let's train our model by creating a solution. So here we have a few different options, so a few different so-called solution types. In our case, we will use an item recommendation. So a solution is, like I have said, a trained model. And then this can be used to make some predictions, some recommendations, or just do some work basically. And for this solution, we have to use a so-called recipe. So again, the solution is the trained model, and this trained model uses some kind of algorithms. So the algorithms are what we call recipes. So they are like pre-configured algorithms that are made for specific use cases. In our case, we can have a look what we want. So what is the closest to what we want? We could use personalized ranking or something like similar items. So here it would predict items that are similar to a given item based on the co-occurrence of an item in the user-item interaction. Well, we could use that to just suggest some similar items, for example. This is something that we could do, some personalized ranking maybe, but in our case, we could use also just this user personalization. So here it recommends an item that a user will interact with based on their preferences. So here, this is actually what we want, like predicting a recommended movie in our case. So therefore, let's, after we have selected item recommendation, select here our recipe. And this is the one that will be used now to train our model on our data set. Of course, we also have to give this a name. So we can call this movie recommendation, maybe something like solution. And then once we have done this, we can go to next. And here we can now define the training. So we don't need to make lots of modifications actually in here. We can just leave this to turned on. So like this, it automatically creates a new solution version. This is always then a new trained model. So based on the maybe changes in the data set, this can be trained over and over again. So here we can say something like every 7 days. So this is the frequency. It will train this again and create a new version. In our case, we can leave it at this one or just turn it off. Doesn't really matter. Anyways, we should delete all of the resources afterwards as well, so that we are making sure that we don't incur any unnecessary cost. So let's set this to turn off. And here we have now the columns for training. We can say we want to have only some specific columns included. So you see those are the ones that are required for the training always. And here we can have some additional ones that we might want to add or don't add. So you see here we have all of those columns selected. Then in the items data set, we can also see if we want to include the year or not. And here again, they are required and the title can't be used for the training. Afterwards, we also have the same thing with our user data set. So essentially, we don't need to make any changes in our case, but we could just select which of the columns we actually want to have included in our training. And then we also have some hyperparameter configuration. So every algorithm has different so-called hyperparameters. So you can use them to change how the model works. So we have some, for example, small modifications to the model, and sometimes with different hyperparameters, they might work in a little bit of a better way. So here, this could be also adjusted. And in our case, this can also, of course, depend on what algorithms we are using. But in our case, we could just add something like apply recency bias, because you remember that we have a timestamp included in our data set, so in the interaction, and here we could add a recency bias. This means, for example, we want to have a stronger weight on the more recent interactions, because maybe this is more important because this more reflects the current situation of our user, the current preference of our user. So therefore we could add this as a hyperparameter, or yeah, just basically the algorithm like this. We will check this box, this is fine. And then afterwards, we can just leave all of those settings like this, click on next, and now we have the overview. This looks all good. And now we want to go ahead and create this solution. So again, this will take a little while. Here it says anywhere from 20 to 48 hours. It won't take that long in our case, but again, we will be back once this has been completed. And now that we have created this solution, which actually takes quite a while, we see that this has also created a solution version. This is always one that we need. We always need one solution version that is active. And this is then the one that can be used now in our campaign. So now we have trained our model and now we want to use it by creating a campaign. So that's now what we want to have a look at in the next lecture. Now that we have trained our model, this means we have created the solution. We want to create a campaign, and we can already see in this solution, we also have already this option to create a campaign using this solution. So essentially, we just need to navigate into our dataset group. And in here, we also have the option to get recommendations. So we can do this by, for example, creating a campaign or also a batch inference job. In our case, we want to create a campaign to see the results of the recommendations. So let's see how this works. We will just set up our campaign. So I will just call it campaign and then maybe movie recommendation. Now we have to select a solution, and this solution has to have at least one active version. And we also maybe sometimes when we retrain this, we have additional new versions. So we can say that we automatically want to use the latest version here. And then we can leave all of the rest of the default settings and we can go ahead and create our campaign. Again, this might take a little while until this is created, and then we will be able to see the result. This actually took quite a while until this campaign has been created, but eventually after maybe a half an hour or something, this has been created. And now, of course, we can get recommendations from this campaign using these APIs. So in here, we can make a get recommendations API call to get now recommendations using this campaign. And here we can also see this campaign ARN. Of course, using this in an application goes way beyond the purpose of this lecture. But if you want to have more information, you can also have a look at this developer guide. In our case, though, we anyways want to see how we can now test this campaign. So here in this campaign, we can also scroll down and see test campaign results. So before we use it in our application, we can see how this works and also just test it, see what are the results. In our case, let's actually open up our users data. So we want to use maybe something like this. 31, so we use John. We can enter here the ID and then get recommendations from this. We could also add additional context. So here we can add some metadata, some values, some fields that are maybe also present in the data. We don't want to do that in our case. So we can say we just want to get the recommendations for this user ID. And here we can see some of those recommendations, including also the score. So potentially here, this user might like this item or maybe this item. And here we can see, a couple of items that would be a good recommendation to this user. Of course, we could also add some additional context. For example, we can say maybe the age of this user is, let's say in this case, let's just use any age. So I say age, and then maybe something like, let's use a higher value, maybe we say get recommendations, and then potentially this is affecting also the recommendation system. So in this case here, we have 25 recommendations, and sometimes there can be also some recommendation reasons. In our case, this is not the case, but we can see also, of course, the score, so the confidence score, how much confidence is behind this recommendation. All right, so this is how we can create a campaign and then also make recommendations using this campaign. And of course, after we finish with everything, we also want to make sure that we are cleaning up our resources so that we are not incurring any unnecessary cost. Before we do this though, we also quickly want to have a look at the filter and just mention them. So in here, we can remove certain items from our recommendation. So we can set up some rules. For example, I can say I want to create a new filter and I can build an expression here. So for example, I can say I want to exclude or include specific item IDs or user IDs. And this can be set up using here this expression builder. So for example, I can say where the, let's say, title is in, and then maybe we have a specific value. So maybe the title, and in here we can specify, for example, some titles of the movie, or maybe just directly specify a year. And like this, we can exclude specific items from the recommendation. All right. And now afterwards, we of course want to delete now the resources. So I'm expanding custom resources, and in here we can first of all open the campaigns. I say I want to delete this campaign. I can just copy and paste delete. Afterwards, we also want to delete all of the solutions. This one we can open in here, and then we have the option to delete this solution. Again, I will choose here delete. And this cannot be deleted now because it is still being used in one or more campaigns. So we should wait maybe a little bit until this campaign is also deleted. And then after this campaign has been successfully deleted, so this might take a couple of seconds, up to maybe 1 or 2 minutes, we can also go ahead and also delete the solutions. So we navigate here to the solutions, and in here we can also open this, and now we can say here delete. So again, let's paste in delete. And then we delete this. So this again might take a little while until this deletion is completed. And after that, we are then able to delete this entire dataset group. So this is also what we will be doing then after this deletion is completed. And now that solution is deleted, and we can go back to our data set group. And then after we have deleted the campaign and the solution, we can also delete the data sets. So in here we find them, and then we have to open them and we can delete them. So let me delete the first one. The second one we also want to delete. So basically all of them. And then once this deletion is completed as well, we can go back to the dataset group. And then after this has completed, we can now delete this dataset group. So again, we confirm it, and then this has been deleted. So there are a few steps, but now we have cleaned up everything. Of course, in my case, I have also this second dataset group, which of course I will also make sure to delete that as well. Hope it was helpful, and see you in the next lecture.